My father threw me out of the house and slapped me with the DNA results. He yelled, "You're the daughter of a cheating woman." While my golden child brother laughed, I grabbed the papers and read them. Today's story is about a father who kicked his daughter out of his home. Jessica was 24, and Robert slammed some DNA papers in front of her and said, "You know what? I've thought this for a long time, but it turns out you're not my daughter." And just like that, he kicked her to the curb. Well, Jessica didn't take that lightly. She went and got her own DNA test with far more thorough results. And guys, you're not going to see this coming. It's hard to put into words what I'm feeling right now. Everything I thought I knew about my family has completely turned upside down. And the worst part is, deep down, I think I always knew something wasn't right. For as long as I can remember, I've always felt like an outsider in my own family. My father, Robert, made it clear that I could never measure up to my older brother, Nick. While Nick was showered with love and praise, I received nothing but cold indifference. No matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. I told myself it was just favoritism. Some parents just preferred one child over the other. If I worked harder, stayed out of trouble, or achieved more, maybe I could win my father's approval. But no matter what I did, he always found a way to tear me down. When I was around 10 years old, I overheard whispers about my mother, Susan, from my Aunt Carol during a family gathering. That's when I found out about a drunken confession. My mother had admitted to an affair around the time I was conceived. She laughed it off, they said, calling it ancient history, but those words never left my mind. I didn't want to believe it, so I convinced myself that my father just preferred having a boy. The alternative was too painful to consider. Nick, on the other hand, looked exactly like Robert. He had the same sharp features, the same dark brown hair, the same piercing gaze. I, however, looked nothing like either of my parents. A lot of times, people would ask me if I was adopted. That always hurt. And now, just a little over a week ago, everything came crashing down. The family dinner had been tense from the start. Robert had been unusually quiet, barely touching his food when, usually, he'd be busy boasting about Nick's accomplishments, no matter how small. Then, without warning, he slammed a stack of papers onto the table. He declared that I was not his daughter, but the product of a cheating woman. He had taken a DNA test for both me and Nick, and the results, he claimed, had confirmed what he had always suspected. I was not his child. I was the result of my mother's betrayal. He said this was why I had never been good enough, why he had never loved me. My mother, Susan, sat frozen in place, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't say a word. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend me. The weight of his words crushed me. My entire world shattered. I had always known he didn't love me, but to hear him say it out loud, to be told that I had never belonged, that I had no place in this family, was a pain I wasn't prepared for. Then, with finality, Robert told me to leave. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My father had always been cold, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I begged him, "Please don't do this," and pleaded with him to reconsider. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn, but he was unmoved. His decision was final, and I turned to my mother, Susan, hoping for some kind of support. But she only shook her head, her gaze fixed on the table. She would not fight for me. She would not even look at me. Nick was sitting across from me, and he let out a quiet laugh. He had always reveled in my misery, and this moment was no different. I fell to my knees, sobbing and begging for them to reconsider. I had done nothing wrong. I had spent my entire life trying to be the daughter they wanted, only to be thrown away like I was nothing. But Robert stood firm, repeating that I was no longer welcome. Then, before I could even process it, he raised his hand and struck me across the face. The impact sent a sharp sting through my skin, but the pain of betrayal was far worse. That was it. There was nothing left to fight for. I grabbed the stack of papers and staggered out of the house. My mind was numb, my heart shattered, and I didn't even know what I was going to do until I ended up at my friend Sophia's doorstep. She took one look at me and pulled me inside. For the rest of the week, I barely moved. I refused to leave Sophia's apartment, refused to eat, refused to speak. I curled up in bed and let the weight of everything just crush me. Robert's words echoed in my mind over and over. I was not his daughter. I had never belonged. I was nothing. The DNA test, it sat untouched on the nightstand, and I didn't even know why I even grabbed it in the first place. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I was terrified that reading it would confirm everything. Then I truly had no family left. But after 7 long days of shutting myself away, something inside me shifted. I had to know the truth. And then I saw it. I read it again and again and again. And suddenly, I started shaking for a different reason. Robert had misread the results. Nick was the one who isn't his biological son, not me. Nick, the golden child, the one Robert had loved so much, the one he had placed on a pedestal, wasn't even his. See, Robert had been so desperate to prove I didn't belong that he had not even bothered to read the results properly. His hatred for me was so strong that he had blinded himself to the truth. It all made sense now. Susan's reaction, the way she had sat there in silence, the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just guilt, it was something else. She had known. She had known all along. A cold, simmering rage began to take root inside me. Robert had thrown me out like a piece of trash, humiliated me, and ripped my heart out all because he had been too blinded by his own bias to see the truth. And now I have the truth. I was not the outsider. I was not the liar. I wasn't the one who did not belong. And now I'm stuck with this knowledge, wondering what to do. Nick, he doesn't know. He's completely in the dark, probably still basking in the belief that he's Robert's pride and joy. Susan knows, though. Her reaction at the table makes so much sense. She wasn't just upset. She was absolutely terrified. I'm furious. I'm hurt. But most of all, I'm exhausted. Robert has spent my entire life making me feel like I didn't belong, only for the truth to be revealed that he's been directing his hatred at the wrong person. I haven't decided what to do yet. Part of me wants to confront them, to know the truth, to throw it back in their face. But another part of me wonders if it's even worth it. Robert has made it crystal clear how little he thinks of me, regardless of biology. What good would it do to prove he's wrong? For now, I'll just continue staying with Sophia while trying to process everything. She's been my rock through this, reminding me that I don't owe my family anything. I'll be back. Update number 1. It's been a month now. Let me tell you, it's been a whirlwind, but I finally did what I've been debating for weeks. I confronted my mother, Susan. I couldn't carry the weight of this anger and betrayal any longer, and I needed answers. A few days ago, I asked to meet her in private, away from the rest of the family. She looked hesitant, almost as if she knew what was coming, but agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in town, and the moment I sat down across from her, the floodgates opened. I asked her the question that's been haunting me since the day Robert threw me out with those DNA results. Why didn't she defend me? Why didn't she stop him from treating me like an outsider all these years? Why did she allow me to carry the burden of being different when she knew the truth all along? Her face shifted from defensive to pain as I spoke. I could tell my words were hitting her hard, but I didn't hold back. I told her how it felt to grow up constantly being compared to Nicholas, never being good enough, and always just being reminded in subtle and not so subtle ways that I wasn't truly part of the family. I explained how much it hurt to watch her stand by silently, while father and brother belittled me, mocked me, and made me feel like I was nothing. I asked her point blank why she stayed silent at the dinner, when Robert accused me of being the product of her affair. I told her how much it broke me to see her sitting there, tears streaming down her face, but saying nothing to defend me. If she knew the truth, if she knew I was the biological child, why didn't she speak up? Her response was heartbreaking, though it didn't excuse anything. She admitted that she was paralyzed by guilt, not just about the affair, but about how the entire family dynamic unfolded. She confessed that she always felt torn between protecting me and just keeping the peace with Robert, who, by the way, had grown colder towards her over the years. She said that staying quiet was the only way to maintain some semblance of stability in our family, even though she now realizes it came at my expense. I told her I didn't buy that excuse. Stability at what cost? My self-worth? My mental health? I told her that she had a responsibility to stand up for me as a mother. She failed. Her guilt, her fear, whatever the reason she had for staying quiet, didn't justify the years of neglect and emotional abuse I endured. I also told her I was tired of being everyone's scapegoat. I wasn't going to carry the weight of her mistakes anymore. The truth was out now, and it was her mess to deal with, not mine. I said I didn't care what excuses Robert or Nick might come up with to justify their treatment of me, but her silence hurt the most because she was supposed to be my advocate. She apologized, but I don't know, guys, it felt hollow. Maybe it's because I've spent so many years hoping for an apology that actually meant something, or maybe it's because no words can undo the damage that's already been done. She said she wished that she had been brave, that she had stood up to Robert for my sake, and she admitted that she let Nick become the golden baby because she thought it would placate Robert and keep their marriage intact. Hearing her admit all this gave me a mix of validation and sadness. It was strange. It confirmed what I already suspected. I was never a priority in this family, and while her guilt might be genuine, it doesn't change the fact that I grew up feeling unloved and unwanted. I left that conversation feeling lighter, but also more resolved. I can't change the past. I can't force Susan to make up for what's already been lost, but I can set boundaries. I can stop giving her, or anyone else in the family, the power to hurt me. For now, I've decided to step back from my relationship with her. I need time to heal and figure out what a healthy dynamic is, if any, might look like between us. I'm not closing the door completely, but I'm also not ready to let her back into my life in a meaningful way. I don't regret confronting her. It was long overdue, and I finally feel like I've said what I needed to say, but now it's time to focus on myself, on rebuilding my life, and on finding people who will love and support me unconditionally. I'm done carrying the weight of their mistakes, and I refuse to let their dysfunctional family define me anymore. Update number 2. It's been a few months. Well, things just got a lot messier. For me, a few weeks after my confrontation with Susan, she reached out to me again. She begged to meet, saying that she had something important to tell me. Honestly, I didn't want to go. After our last conversation, I felt drained, and I wasn't sure I had the emotional energy to sit through another round of her apologies or excuses. But something about the way she asked, desperate, almost panicked, made me decide to give her one last chance. When we met, she looked like she had not slept in days. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she sipped on her coffee. So I sat down, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. I didn't expect much, but the moment she opened her mouth, I knew this was not just another round of regret-filled admissions. She confessed that she doesn't actually know who Nick's biological father is. At first, I thought I misheard her. How could she not know? I couldn't help myself. I taunted her. I asked her point blank just how much of a cheater she had to be to not know who the father was. My words were harsh, and I could see them cut deep. But I didn't care. After everything I've endured, I was not in the mood to sugarcoat my feelings. Susan broke down, tears streaming down her face, as she admitted she felt neglected and unloved in their marriage. She said that Robert was cold and distant even in the early years of their relationship. She had hoped things would improve after they married, but they did not, and she felt trapped, lonely, and desperate for any escape from the emptiness she felt at home. Well, I listened, feeling a small pang of sympathy despite my anger. I knew firsthand how cold and unkind Robert could be, but still, I couldn't let her off the hook. I reminded her that no matter how unhappy she was, she chose to stay with him. She chose to sacrifice me, her own daughter, on the altar of a marriage that was clearly toxic. I told her it was ironic that she stayed for stability, yet her actions created nothing but chaos. She admitted to meeting men in bars during those years, saying it was her way of escaping her unhappiness, even if just for a moment. She called herself foolish, selfish, and full of regret for the choices she made. I could see the shame etched on her face, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook entirely. That's when I made a snide comment about how lucky she was that Nick turned out to look so much like Robert. I sarcastically joked that she must have had some kind of radar for men with similar features. My intention was obviously to mock her, but the moment the words left my mouth, something shifted. Her face froze, her eyes widened, and she gasped as if a light bulb was going off above her head. She whispered that there was one possibility she never considered before, one that seemed ridiculous at first, but now made unsettling sense. She said it's possible, even likely, that Nick's biological father might be my paternal uncle, my father's own brother, David. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sheer audacity of it all was too much for me to even process. My mother was sitting across from me confessing that she might have had an affair with her husband's brother, and that golden child Nick might be my Uncle David's son. I sat there stunned. I was in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, without another word, I got up and left. I couldn't handle hearing anymore. The idea that Nick might be my cousin instead of my brother was too much for me to process, and now I'm left feeling more confused than ever. I don't know what to believe, and I don't know what to do with this information. Part of me wants to confront David, to demand an answer, but another part of me wonders if it's even worth it. My family has been a source of nothing but pain and dysfunction for as long as I can remember, and I'm not sure I want to dig any deeper into this mess. For now, I need time to think. I need time to decide what's best for me because clearly no one else in the family has ever had my best interest at heart. This revelation has left me shaken, and I don't know where to go from here. Update number 3. Hey, it's been a few months since my last update, and I just want to start by apologizing for the silence. So much has happened, and honestly, I needed time to process everything and figure out my next steps. After my last meeting with Susan, things escalated in ways I did not anticipate. I've been dealing with the fallout ever since. So, shortly after I walked out on her confession about Nick possibly being my Uncle David's son, my mother began bombarding me with calls and messages. At first, I just ignored them, thinking she would eventually leave me alone, but the messages kept coming. Pleas, apologies, and desperate attempts to convince me to keep quiet about what I now knew. She begged me not to ruin the family, not to destroy her marriage, and to consider, quote, the big picture. She framed it as an appeal for peace, but to me it was just another example of her selfishness. Her words did not feel like concern for me or even for Nick. They were entirely about herself and the life she was trying to maintain so hard. She didn't want the truth to come out because it would shatter the illusion of a functional family that she had carefully constructed. It was never about my well-being. It was about preserving her image and alleviating her guilt. The more messages I received, the angrier I became. Susan's actions were not driven by love or remorse. They were motivated by fear. She had used me as her scapegoat for years, allowing me to be neglected and emotionally abused, and now she wanted to carry the burden of her secrets as well, on me. It was infuriating, and it solidified my decision. I wasn't going to let her get away with this anymore. Well, over the past few months, I've been focusing on gathering as much evidence as possible. I've saved every pleading text, voicemail from Susan, documenting her desperation and her repeated requests for me to stay silent. These messages, while frustrating, are proof of her guilt and her willingness to sacrifice me to protect herself. I've also been piecing together other evidence where I can. It hasn't been easy. Susan is careful, and much of what happened years ago has been buried, but I've managed to find a few leads, and I'm determined to keep digging. Whether it's old photos, correspondence, or even a family testimony, I'm building a case that will reveal the truth. This isn't just about revenge or exposing Susan's lies. It's about reclaiming my voice and putting an end to the years of manipulation and neglect. Well, my family has thrived on secrecy and favoritism, and it's time for that to end. I've spent too long being treated as less, and I refuse to let their lies define me any longer. I know some people might question why I'm going to such lengths, and I've questioned myself at times too, but every time I look back on the years of emotional abuse and dismissal I endured, I remind myself that this isn't just for me. It's about breaking a toxic cycle and ensuring that the truth is finally known. I've been cautious about my next steps, but I'm planning to reveal everything when the timing is right. This isn't something I want to rush into. It needs to be done carefully and with all the facts laid out. I want there to be no room for denial or deflection when the truth finally comes to light. Final update, update number 4. So, almost this month has passed since my last update, and I can finally say that everything is out in the open. With the unwavering support of my best friend Sophia, I found the strength to confront my family one last time. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the only way I had to free myself from the burden of their lies and manipulation. Sophia stood by me every step of the way, helping me prepare and organize everything I gathered. She reminded me of my worth and encouraged me to see this confrontation not as revenge, but as a chance to reclaim my narrative. I was no longer the scapegoat or the outsider. I was somebody who deserved to be heard. Armed with the DNA results, Susan's messages, and my own resolve, I walked into that meeting ready to lay everything bare. The family meeting itself was tense from the moment I entered. Susan looked panicked the second she saw me, and I could tell she knew what was coming. Nick sat there, smug as ever, probably assuming I had come to beg for forgiveness or seek closure. Robert, stoic but distant, the same way he's always been with me. It didn't matter though. I wasn't there to seek approval or forgiveness. I was there to tell the truth. I began by addressing the accusations that had been thrown at me during the heated family gatherings months ago. I laid out the DNA evidence that proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was Robert's biological daughter. Susan's face turned white as I presented the papers, her guilt practically written all over her. Next, I shifted the focus to Nick. I revealed that the same DNA test results also showed that Nick was not Robert's son, but David's son. The silence in the room was deafening. Susan gasped, and for the first time, Nick's smug demeanor cracked. Robert's face fell as the betrayal hit him like a ton of bricks. I could see the realization wash over him. The years of lies, the favoritism he had shown Nick, the mistreatment he had allowed toward me, all based on a false assumption. Robert was absolutely crushed, not only by Susan's affair, but also by the fact that his own brother had betrayed him in such a personal, devastating way. I could see the anger and heartbreak in his eyes, and for a brief moment, I also felt sympathy for him. But then I remembered how he had treated me for years, and any sympathy I had evaporated. As for Nick, he was utterly stunned. He had spent his whole life basking in undeserved favoritism, believing himself to be the golden child. Now, the foundation of his identity had crumbled beneath him. He wasn't Robert's son, and the privileges he had enjoyed for so long were built on a lie. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Susan, on the other hand, was drowning in guilt. She couldn't even meet my eyes, and I could tell she wanted to say something to defend herself or beg for forgiveness, but no words came. The weight of her actions was heavy, and the room was too suffocating for her usual justifications or manipulations. When I finished, I didn't wait for a response. I had said everything I needed to say, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of freedom. The weight I had carried for so many years, the neglect, the abuse, the constant questioning of my worth, finally lifted. I had done my part, and now the rest was up to them. Since that day, Robert has tried to contact me. He's left voicemails and messages, some apologetic, some angry, and others simply pleading for a chance to talk. I haven't responded. I don't know if I ever will. For years, he chose to believe the worst about me, and I'm not sure I have it in me to rebuild that relationship. As for Nick, his role has completely shifted. The golden child facade is gone, and I hear through mutual acquaintances that he's struggling to adjust to life without the privilege he once took for granted. I don't feel sorry for him. He spent years belittling and taunting me, enjoying every moment of my humiliation, and now he's getting a taste of what it feels like to be on the outside. Susan has also tried to reach out, but her messages feel hollow. She says she wants to, quote, make things right, but I know her well enough to see that it's more about easing her guilt than truly making amends. I'm done being her scapegoat and her emotional punching bag. For now, I'm focusing on myself. I've moved to a new place, far from the toxicity of my family, and I'm working on building a life that's entirely my own. I've reconnected with friends who genuinely care about me, and I'm finally pursuing the dreams I put on hold for so long. Sharing my story here has been incredibly cathartic, and I'm grateful for everyone who's offered support and advice. I feel lighter, free, and more at peace than I've ever been. This chapter of my life is finally over, and I'm ready to move forward without looking back. So, thank you everybody.